welcome back to another video, and this time we're talking about something special. Now, full disclosure, I have attempted to record this video multiple times, so let's hope that this one is the last attempt. It's been tough trying to get the words out, it's been tough trying to remember everything I want to say, it's been tough trying to make the video work, I think. And so today we're talking about something somewhat recent. If you haven't heard already, Darwyn Cooke, one of the greatest comic book creators of all time, died. And he's one of those creators that I always knew of peripherally, but it took a few years until I started actively seeking out his work, and I read one thing by him, one very particular thing by him that I'm reviewing today that made me a fan of his, and from there I went on and bought New Frontier and his Richard Stark Parker adaptations and started seeking out his art. He's one of those guys that, all things considered, has a relatively small library. When you take away the covers, the variants, the stuff that he's done over the years, his career's been pretty small, and if you go out and try and buy everything he's done, it wouldn't set you back too much. And yet, he's left a massive impact, and so his death has been felt all over. It's been tough trying to imagine a world without something new by Darwyn Cooke. And so I think the best way to honor that and the best way to talk about him is to talk about the thing that made me a fan of his in the first place. Now, I won't ramble too long about Darwyn Cooke as a person and his views and such, because that would be its own video, and that's the thing that's been dragging down this recording, is just I keep rambling for on and on and on about who Darwyn Cooke is and why I love him, and why it's going to be tough living in a comic book industry without him, why his impact has been felt, and why I think he had the right idea, and why I feel like we need more people like him, but I'll save all that hopefully for later. So today we're talking about a Darwyn Cooke project that he both wrote and drew. We're talking about Book 1, the first 6 issues of his Spirit run. Now, he wrote this for 12 issues. There's also the Batman Spirit team-up that was written by Jeff Loeb and drawn by Darwyn Cooke. And there's actually multiple collections of these. You can buy it in the 2 hardcovers that I have, Book 1 and Book 2. You can buy it in 2 paperbacks, or you can buy it as just a solid paperback that collects all of his issues. I think ultimately buying that one collection would be easier, just because 1, it's cheaper, and 2, these issues read better together anyway. If you want to go out and just buy the single issues, that's good too. But I really like these particular hardcovers, and I wouldn't trade anything for these, because I just like the way they're made so much. So let me just talk about that for a second. You have a really nice cover up front like this with the Spirit name and then drawing of him, and then you got a nice back cover here. Usually hardcovers, if they're high quality and not just the black, when you take the dust jacket off, you have a drawing that looks exactly like the cover or something completely different underneath the dust jacket. They never really work together, they're just kind of there. But with this particular collection that you might not necessarily be able to make out on camera, if you take the dust jacket off, you have on the back side the same drawing you have on the dust jacket itself, which is all fine and dandy, but the real prize, the real thing that makes this thing look so cool, is you take the front side of the dust jacket off, and you find out that this is just a cutout, that this little hole here and the Spirit word, the letters of the Spirit right here are just cut through, and there's a drawing here, and it just looks fantastic. It's a really nice design. Another thing about this is that typically when you take dust jacket off of hardcovers and they're kind of like cheap cardboard, when you hold them for too long, your fingers start to sweat and you start leaving thumbprints or fingerprints all over the book itself. And these don't have that. The actual hardback is of such good quality that you can hold it for hours and hours and it doesn't leave any imprint. It's just really well made. It's really premier. I like it. It's really well made. And the only issue with this hardcover at all is just you have to be careful with it. I always put these in bags, but if you aren't careful, then you could see these cutouts that they could start to rip, or you could start bending them, and I even have like a small tear here. So you just have to be careful with them. But they look fantastic, and again, it's just custom Darwyn Cooke art, and I love it. So this is the thing that made me a Darwyn Cooke fan. This is the thing that the moment I heard that he died, the first thing I went back to in my long boxes is I went back to this and I started rereading it. This is one of my favorite comic book runs of all time. This is, I think, the definitive superhero story Essentially what Darwyn Cooke has done with his issues on the Spirit is that he's just given us a series of one-shots. And there's some through lines here and there, some stuff with the octopus and some stuff with Denny Colt and some things about their origins and some characters that come back that appeared in previous issues, but you can essentially just pick up any issue of his run and start reading. And that's part of the fun of it, is that it's a classic sort of blending of Silver and Golden Age, with like the Golden Age pulpy heroes with some more zany and kind of not continuity-driven Silver Age stuff, while at the same time modernizing it with technology from today or social issues from today. And so it's like this perfect amalgam of everything comic books have ever been, and then everything comic books should be. And one of the most interesting things about Darwyn Cooke is that he's had this argument against the way we've darkened up our heroes. He doesn't have a problem with heroes with flaws. He doesn't have a problem with the idea of superheroes making mistakes or us being able to relate to them because they struggle or because they don't necessarily live up to the ideals they wish to. That's not his problem. His problem is more so this idea that we need to make them harder edged. This idea that superheroes always need to be traumatized, that superheroes always need to have psychological issues, that we can't have pure altruism without some kind of a catch. And part of his issue is that, sure, we can argue that no one's 100% good, but part of the reason we look up to superheroes is that they're able to overcome that to a degree, or they're able to make us acknowledge that in some degree. And so his comics have like this very pure sense to them. Everything he writes is sort of layered with this, at least everything he writes in the superhero genre, is sort of layered with this more pure, more optimistic view of things, even if things don't automatically work out. Something we have here throughout these Spirit issues is the Spirit gives criminals a chance. He always, when he meets them and he hears their stories, he's like, well, if you just say this and stick around for the police, then everything will be okay, or the DA will be able to cut you a deal, or you won't have to worry about this, this, and this. And he tries to give them an out through the system, and 9 times out of 10, they don't actually take the out. And so it's not, the system is not working the way it should. People aren't able to change who they are, but neither is the Spirit, and he's trying to stay optimistic, and he's trying to stay faithful to the system. And so it's more, even though all these stories don't necessarily have happy endings, they still have kind of an uplifting, put a smile on your face attempt to be happy. And I think that distills Darwyn Cooke down perfectly. This is my favorite thing by Darwyn Cooke. I know New Frontier is technically a better story than this, and his Parker stuff's amazing, but this run is is just one of the best comic book runs of all time. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And so to talk about it in more detail, I think the best way to describe this series, this set of 12 issues, which came out from 2007, I think the last issue of his run was published in 2008, but it started in 2007, and the ongoing itself actually lasted until like 30-something issues, but Darwyn Cooke left after the first 12. But the best way to like describe this series as a whole, to describe what this book is that this is an extremely sexy comic book, and I don't mean that just in like the women. I mean that more in the sense of there's a style to this, there's a flavor, there's an atmosphere, there's a sort of wish fulfillment escapism to it that isn't the sort of one-sided kind of ignorance is bliss escapism you get with something like a James Bond film. The kind of sexiness that this book has is more of just the, I want to breathe this air, that everything about these dynamics and everything about these characters and their personalities and what they do day in and day out and the types of stories have this slant to them. There is just this purity of storytelling, but then at the same time this purity of characterization that it's just so much fun. And it's kind of like the Daredevil thing of like there is just this there's just like this weird quality, this non-physical thing about this book that the moment you touch it, the moment you look at the first page, you know something's different about it. And I don't know how to put that into words. It's sexy. It's this thing that makes your brain fire on all kinds of pleasure cylinders, and it's not just kind of superficial. It's engaging and it's fun, and you don't know where the time goes when you're reading it, and it's not a chore. Every thematic layer you don't have to work to uncover. It's all right there, but then it's not blatantly in your face and spelled out for you by the end. It's this very natural form of storytelling, and I've never quite seen that before. Even in some of my favorite writers like Grant Morrison, there was like a process of deciphering what he means, and this is not that. This is just, there is a direct link between Darwyn Cooke and your brain when you read this. And I don't know how he does it, he just does, and it's fantastic. So like I said, these are all one-shots, and I could go through and just kind of like summarize each one-shot, but I feel like that would take forever, and it's more fun to sit down and read these. I wouldn't necessarily want to spoil anything here. The one thing I will say that I think is worth mentioning is we have lots of great writers, we have lots of great artists, we have very few people that can do both. And despite having that small subset of people that can do both, there's always sometimes a bit of a dissonance. Like, for example, I love Matt Wagner to pieces. I think he's an incredible artist. I think he's an incredible writer. I think at times he can blend those two things perfectly. But every now and then he writes something where the writing is just a way for him to get to something he wants to draw. And then you have other people, other writer-artist combos, like, say, I'm blanking off the top of my head, maybe like Frank Miller, where like the art isn't, I like Frank Miller art more than most people, I can't necessarily defend it, but the art isn't great, and yet it's more about the writing. And so even when they blend them well together, like what Matt Wagner does with Batman or Frank Miller does with Daredevil, there is still a bit of more work to it. There is still more of an effort to try and consciously balance both things out, and Darwyn Cooke makes it look effortless. His art and his writing are just perfect for this material. There is maybe one panel in this entire set of 6 issues where something looks proportionately incorrect or just not consistent with the rest of the panels we've seen on that page, and that's about it. Darwyn Cooke knows exactly how much to write in the panels, exactly how much to draw, exactly the right proportion of splash pages as opposed to just like 6 or like 9 different panels on one page kind of thing. He knows how to slow you down, he knows how to speed you up. He knows what he's writing. He knows the 22-page format better than I think anyone I've ever seen. And that's part of the fun of reading this, is that just because it takes you 5 minutes to read the first issue and it feels like it's only 10 pages despite being 22, that doesn't mean the next issue will take you that long. There's an issue in here that took me 20 minutes, there's an issue in here that took me 5 minutes, and it's just him being a master of pacing, and it's him understanding how he writes, how the art needs to convey what he's saying, and how the art can function without the dialogue. And it's just beautifully done. There's no kind of like gimmick or formula to this. There isn't this format of everyone has internal monologues, or every issue is completely action driven, or every issue is completely on the side of the villain. Every issue has its own flavor to it. Every issue is just slightly different. There's actually one issue where every couple pages we shift perspectives in the inner monologues, and that's the issue where we learn the origin of both Denny Colt and the octopus. And we make the city a character through these people. One of the most interesting themes that's running throughout this whole set of 6 issues is this idea that people have a distinct human nature that doesn't change. This idea that regardless of what happens to you, you are always the same person. And you are that person based on the society you've grown up in. And despite how much good or how much bad you do, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for you to really break away from that mold. And so the whole area of Central City, everyone there is just kind of in this vicious cycle, but it's not vicious in the sense that it's bad, it's just this cycle, and they all kind of accept it, and they all kind of love the routineness of it. It goes back to this book being about a very particular style and throwing you into a very particular world, and it's not about you breaking this world apart and the world having a beginning, middle, and end. It's about being immersed in it and kind of forgetting what happens in a previous issue because the next issue is getting you into a different headspace, yet at the same time maintaining that theme of eternal recurrence. And I love that. I think that's really fascinating. It's not like a deterministic view. It's not saying that people are incapable of like changing their minds necessarily, but more of just there is a part of you that you will never be able to quite get rid of, and you can't ask like a leopard to change its spots or something like that, or a tiger to change its stripes. Like, there, regardless of what happens to Denny Colt as he dies and comes back, he is still Denny Colt, and that personality never goes away from him. Same with the octopus, and it's more about society like reaffirming that for you, and these characters sort of being enablers for each other. And I really like that. I really like that mix. We have Darwyn Cooke reinventing a lot of the characters from the classic Will Eisner spirit, and I don't actually know a lot about the Spirit. I've read some, like, in short strips of the Spirit, but I've never, like, actually bought a collection of Spirit stories and read through them all, mostly because they're really expensive. And I would love to go back and read all of Will Eisner's Spirit, but I don't think my wallet would be able to support that kind of journey. So I know very little about the Spirit. I know what I know from the movie, and I know what I know from here. And I looked up some things here and there. I know that the octopus never shows his face. I know that Pagel, the character here that shows up in the second issue and in the Batman Spirit crossover, has been reinvented with a different kind of origin to explain her motivations a bit more. I know that some of the characters here have gone from like straight black and white, good guys, bad guys, to being reinvented for a more modern context, and I'll talk about that, but I can't really give you a breakdown of how Cooke is reinventing them because I don't know the original inventions. So all I can really say is just kind of recap what I find interesting about these origins in general. What we have here is we have a classic pulp adventure, and usually what we get is there are certain books that are written in the period that they were written in, like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns was not set in the past, it was set when he wrote it. But it's such a story that you can't tell it again without keeping it in that context. That zeitgeist is important for that story. And then you have other characters like Sherlock Holmes that were at the time written in present day, yet for some reason we've nonsensically perpetuated the fact that he's always in the 1800s, even though the stories weren't designed that way. And then when we got BBC's Sherlock, we brought him back to the modern context because that's always been the idea. The idea has always been this character in the now, not this character stuck in a context. And pulp heroes have kind of straddled that line. Sometimes they're great in their original, like 1930s, 40s era. Other times you can reinvent them and go forward. A lot of people with the Spirit, I think, I've heard people make this argument that you should always tell Spirit stories in the 30s and 40s, that you should always give him that classic noir vibe as opposed to like a neo-noir. But what Darwyn Cooke does here is he brings them into the modern day, and he uses computers, and there's cell phones, and there's like 24-hour news cycles and 24-hour cartoons and such, and he uses that to reinvent the characters. So what we have here is, instead of doing stuff like corrupt landlords, and instead of doing stuff like people going off to war and like Great Depression era stories, we're redefining these characters' origins and relationships and abilities to solve crimes with things like 2000s terrorism policy, mass media scares and paranoia, marketing campaigns and such. There's this great issue where one of the characters is marketing pork and beans that's redistributed from old army surpluses, and he's advertising them using the Spirit, and the commercial that is broadcasting these Spirit brand snacks actually says in the commercial that your kids, you love sugar because we've taught you to love sugar, and don't worry because your mom is too lazy to read the ingredients. They literally say this in the ad, and so it is kind of a satire of the way we market to children. And then at the same time we have like a Lois Lane type character named Ginger Coffee who is broadcasting her location because she's like for the spectacle of the news as she's being saved by the Spirit, and despite the Spirit trying her best to save her, because she's broadcasting what's going on, the bad guys are constantly able to find them. And so you're playing on that like news culture, and you're playing on the media culture. There are things here where like information is readily available on the internet. There was this thing here with Pagel where her origins tied to like help in third world countries and Middle Eastern warlords and stuff like that. Like, it's very much taking these characters, keeping them as pulp style characters, but redefining the pulp with what we have today as opposed to sticking 100% purely to what they were. You have a character named Silk Satin who is like a CIA agent, and instead of doing like the classic pulp damsel in distress thing, she actually saves the Spirit in the story, which is awesome. You have a thing here where Ebony White, who is a character I'm familiar with, and I know like the controversy surrounding him, here we kind of reinvent him and we talk about like his history and him not having any parents and the way he's able to function in this city driving a taxi as just a kid, and we kind of normalized his appearance because Will Eisner, the whole point of Will Eisner's Ebony White was the idea of we just drew everyone exaggerated at that point, but the point of Ebony White was that we've drawn him as this like stereotypical exaggeration, but we're treating him like everyone else, like every other character. And instead of doing that, Darwyn Cooke normalizes him without the exaggerated facial features and such, and talks about the context this kid's growing up in. And we've made him far more relatable. We've made him still able to function and serve the same purpose. And it's a really good way of commenting on like social dynamics of today as opposed to social dynamics of the past. You have stuff here with the octopus and Denny cult origin being tied together, which is really interesting, and that stuff does get carried forward a little bit here and there. However, these are still one-shots, so if you haven't read the issue that sets any of that stuff up, you're completely fine and it's okay. The relationship between Denny Cult and the octopus is interesting because they are not aware of each other, and again, it goes back to that like eternal recurrence idea of these characters are just constantly stuck in a system, and I kind of like that. You have this thing where Denny Cult dies and then he comes back as the spirit, but everyone kind of knows he's Denny Cult. Like, he puts the mask on and sort of the idea is, well, he looks so average, and the mask kind of draws attention away from him, so you can't really describe what he is, but his girlfriend Ellen knows who he is, the police commissioner, her father knows who he is, he's still having a relationship with her. Everyone in the main loop kind of already knows he's Denny Cult, but we're just like perpetuating the myth of the spirit, and that's kind of fun. We're still playing in this idea of the world has evolved, but these people are still stuck in this very specific social bubble, despite social issues evolving, and I think that's really interesting. Then there's the Batman Spirit crossover, which is easily the weakest here. It's written by Jeff Loeb, and he's pretty good. I mean, Jeff Loeb does this annoying thing with Batman where he makes it so Batman doesn't abbreviate his words for some reason. He doesn't do that in Long Halloween, he doesn't do that here, so Batman doesn't feel as stiff, yet at the same time he is kind of the straight man of this whole situation. The whole idea of a police commissioner's conference and a plan where villains from Central City and Gotham City are working together, and it's full of conveniences. The whole thing's pretty contrived and overcomplicated plot by the Joker. It doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, but part of what's good about it is that it's a lot of fun, that it feels very much like a 22-minute kind of special. It's just having fun with these characters. Now, the Batman Spirit special actually kickstarted this ongoing, and so you're supposed to read that and then go to the ongoing because the Batman Spirit special doesn't have the reinventions that Darwyn Cooke does, because it happened beforehand. Yet, for some reason in this collection, it's the last thing when it should be the first. So if you read the first 6 issues and then you go to the Batman Spirit crossover, it feels awkward. But you just have to remember that came out first. It's just in the collection I have reprinted last. It is a lot of fun, though. There's a fun gag near the end where the Spirit's like, so how are you going to get all of these criminals back to your city? And Batman just calls Superman to take them all from the boat and fly them back, and it's kind of hilarious. You have like a very classic Golden Age, almost Burt Ward style Robin. You have the classic comic book scene of a team up where the heroes switch costumes. You have like them kind of meeting each other in a fight and then working together. You have like them trading rogues gallery a little bit. You have this fantastic panel, this splash page of them just running through a burning building, and it's a really fun action-driven comic, and I really enjoy it. But overall, it is the weakest of this particular set. That said, though, I do love this. I think this whole book is absolutely fantastic. It is kind of my quintessential Darwyn Cooke. When I think of that writer, when I think of that artist, this is immediately what comes to mind, and I love it so much. It's one of my favorite things. The opening story with Ginger Coffee and the Spirit trying to save her from the mafia that's kidnapped her, and her broadcasting her location and such, I do think that's the definitive superhero story. Denny Cult's got this womanizing thing, but it never really pans out for him the way he wants it to. And it's really playing on classic superhero tropes. He's got a sidekick in Ebony White, and he's got a very particular costume and hideout and motifs and such, and so it's just overall that first issue is, I think, the definitive superhero story, but I think overall what Darwyn Cooke does here with the Spirit is the definitive superhero comic, that this is what superhero comics at their core are always meant to be. Now you deconstruct this and get darker, or you reconstruct this and make it lighter, you have several variations on what's being done here, but this is the heart of it. And I think that's what Darwyn Cooke is able to capture so well, is like the heart, the vein, the lifeblood of comics that everything else is sprouting from, and him being able to perpetuating like the good nature of it. is what I love about it so much. So this is fantastic. This is one of my favorite runs of all time. I'll be back later this week to talk about book 2 and the last 6 issues. But thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time with another video.